Now, there have been several milestones in this country in the last couple of days, or maybe they're not or shouldn't be milestones at all. But after years of failed attempts to kickstart the country's state-owned refineries, one of them in Port Harcourt has begun production again, processing crude oil for distribution across the country. And there's been some movement in law enforcement, which began earlier this year like something improbable appearing out of a Hollywood cops and robbers movie. The anti-fraud agency, the EFCC, has finally arrested the former governor of Kogi State, Yahaya Bello, marching him into court and securing an order to remand him in custody. So is that episode of the Tom and Jerry cartoon finally over? And what could be good economic news or simply won't make much difference? The National Bureau of Statistics says Nigeria's economy grew by 3.64% in the third quarter of this year, surpassing by a stretch the 2.54% growth rate in the third quarter of 2023 and the 3.19% in the second quarter of 2024. What exactly does all this mean for the standard of living in Nigeria? Well, for their take on these issues of the day, I'm joined now in the studio by the current affairs analyst and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Baze University, Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and by Baba Yusuf, a policy strategist and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, which is also a special, who is also a special economic zones expert and was the first MD and CEO of the first airport free trade zone in Nigeria. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me come to you first. We now call you Prof and Dean because you're both a professor and a dean. So
no, it's fine.
we say
Prof
and Dean. But you wanted to react briefly to the previous discussion that we had about new public management.
Well, I think Prof needs to do some more explaining, because the buck in leadership in every social system, the buck has to stop somewhere. He's talking about democratization. I imagine that he's a professor of public administration, so he's trying to tell us about integration, inclusion in a social system, But that does not mean that everything should be about committee, A leader also consults. So in consulting, there's an element of democratization, inclusion. So that is what I imagine he's trying to say from the prism of public administration, which is his field.
Okay.
So until we get proper explanation, I'm not sure he's offering anything new yet.
Right. Okay. Well, let me not drag you into that discussion.
Totally.
Let's just get on with the other. I mean, from one professor to the other, both of you can sort of put on your professorial hats.
No, Prof. There's nothing professorial here. Let's not.
And bring out your academic books. But let me come to you. Let's start with that Port Harcourt refinery, a monumental achievement which signals a new era for Nigeria, or not a milestone at all?
Well, it's a mix of, it's a mix. I received it with mixed feelings. First of all, we'll talk about the good side of it. It's congratulations. Finally, we have, one arm of the Port Harcourt refinery up and running. Let's not forget that there are two arms. There's the old Port Harcourt refinery and the new Port Harcourt refinery. So the project is still halfway done. That is the good side of it. But then $1.5 billion or more down the drain, I don't know how that could be recouped. Importantly for me going forward, the cherry news is that there is, for the first time in a long time, refining capacity. Dangote is on stream, and we have an arm of Port Harcourt refinery also refining, crude. And what happened is this morning, for the first time, Dangote Refinery actually published, the price of PMS and told Nigerians they have taken the price, notched it down to $970 from $990. So probably beginning of good days ahead. Competition will lead ultimately to tapering down of the prices. But Charles, sustainability is key. We've seen turnaround maintenance done gone by. After a while, the refinery gets shut down again. We hope this turnaround will be, sustainable going forward. But it's a good development.
Okay. Prof, let's face it, various governments, as he said, have tried to get this refinery to work. They've failed, but now it's working. Surely that's some kind of an achievement, which suggests that whatever had prevailed or prevented it from working in the past, whether it's corruption or incompetence or, you know, whatever, mismanagement, that thing has now been overcome.
Yeah, obviously, I agree with him. I think what we should be concerned about now is sustainability. We don't want what happened yesterday to just be a kind of photo op, something to create an immediate impression, and eventually there won't be stability and sustainability. Yes, 60,000 barrels per day. If you add it to Dangote's 650, we are evening up to maybe about 700. You know, not bad for us. And of course, we expect that it will mean increase in supply. And if there's increase in supply from basic economics, it might affect price eventually. And eventually, again, we might be net exporters rather than net importers. And of course, there will be eventually, again, you know, effect on foreign exchange that we're trying to conserve, and we can plug the money into other aspects of governance. You know, but again, what is more important is sustainability. Let's just what yesterday's event not be a one-off thing, you know, because we know how things can happen in this country. You know, something to just impress us, and thereafter, nothing else will continue from then on, you know. Then, of course, what about maintenance again? We were somewhere before we got to this low, and now we're trying to revive things, you know. What attitudinal change are we bringing into the mix so that what we went through in the past will not repeat itself again?
Good point. And you made the point earlier, Baba Yusuf, that one half of that refinery is what is working. They are not refining PMS, and I wonder how much of a difference you think that'll actually make to fuel supply in Nigeria, given that some form of fuel is being added to Nigeria's capacity.
Well, however we look at it, there are some products that are now going to be pushed into the market. I think they are talking about 70% push out at the moment. Like you rightly mentioned, even though the top-notch demand presently is PMS.
Yes, absolutely.
We would have wanted to see effective PMS push-out as against kerosene and others. But that being said, law of demand and supply, again, for the products that are rolling out, you will have surplus in the system, and the assumption is, all things being equal, they will taper down those pricing. And even for kerosene, we know is a fuel for the lower strata of society. So it would be very good if we see it reflecting on the pricing, you know, notching down.
Right, and that's the key thing.
That's the key thing.
Yeah. And Prof, just very briefly, so we can move on to another topic. I mean, might there be economic opportunities that might accrue from it, even if it is limited to the communities around the refinery?
Yeah, of course we expect this to be the case because the chain is very wide, very diverse. And before now, of course, maybe those environments will have been comatose somewhat, you know, but now there's a revival, there's a kind of stimulation of activities, and all the nodes in that value chain are expected to benefit, you know. Then, yesterday I had one of the tanker drivers, obviously celebratory, saying that they're not going to have to drive to Lagos, you know. The fuel is around them, they can just fetch it or take it and, of course, distribute. So that's a kind of relief as well, you know. Maybe on the intangible side, it must also enhance their well-being, because stress of the economy, of living in a kind of country, will also be reduced. So overall, I think it will be very helpful if we can just continue in this trajectory. This is just the first refinery in Port Harcourt. The other one is still there. Warri is still there as well. Then Kaduna is still there. So if these efforts are sustained, of course, we'll be on a good path. But remember, again, there are concerns in circles that is it a proper refining? Isn't it just blending?
Yes, yes.
Is
that,
it really
that was
better?
something that was raised.
Yeah, is it really as good as the Dangote refinery product? So all these questions will have to be answered.
Yeah.
You know,
we'll
need
see how it
a
evolves.
bit of transparency in the circumstance, so that we can all be on the same page.
Indeed. Let's move on to your chum. I shouldn't say your chum, but somebody you've talked about a few times. The former Kogi Governor Yahaya Bello, now in the custody of the EFCC, the Anti-Financial Crimes Agency, over alleged misappropriation of funds. He was declared wanted 7 months ago. Why has it taken so long to arrest him, in your assessment?
Well, first of all, let me step back to, I was here in April, and I said my message to former Governor Yahaya Bello is you can not outrun the state. And that move, that dramatic move, was not a good move. At the end of the day, we are here. But a very valid question you asked, why did it take us so long? In my opinion, like I have advised, a couple of months ago, I've written in my column, and I mentioned, even before Barrister Olukoyede came on board, I was counseling the EFCC,
on board as the head
as
of
the
the
chairman
EFCC,
of EFCC,
right.
that saber rattling as offensive strategy for an institution like EFCC should be tapered down. When you are fighting vested interests in a society that is so, imbued with corruption, your offensive strategy, I advise they should apply what I call the SS strategy, and that is silence and stealth, which will lead to surprise. And if you apply that in the way and manner they do investigations and subsequently arrest, if and need be, that element of surprise will be their joker to ensure that when they make the move, they make it well and they are able to achieve the objective. Because the key here is there's an objective. And to also make sure that you do your homework in terms of marshalling all the evidences and getting things in place before you go into play. Sometimes I know, the leadership of prosecutorial agencies like EFCC are under pressure by the public to act, but then that comes with the territory. You must have the emotional intelligence to stay the course and have your strategy to take people, as at when necessary, to avoid this, unfortunate drama that will linger the process and sometimes even discredit the process. And at the end of the day, the people you are trying to prosecute may use those loopholes, illegally, to be able to either extend
wriggle
out of it or escape.
Okay, well, let me come to you, Prof, because just coming off the back of what Baba Yusuf was saying there, do you think the EFCC finds it particularly challenging to prosecute some of these sort of former governors, high-profile individuals like Yahaya Bello?
Well, the point has been severally made that we're in a special kind of country, where the law works more against the have-nots. Those are the lower rung of the economic ladder, than the powerful, the rich, the influential. And of course, EFCC exists in this matrix, so the experience cannot be different. And of course, we're talking about the critical issue of corruption, which is deep-seated, systemic, and you know what it means. You know what the power of money can do, and the more you have it, the more you're able to pull strings. And when it comes to prosecution, of course, there are also allegations in circles of how the judiciary is easily manipulated, unfortunately. But so all these will have to come into play when we want to situate the experience of EFCC. But the case of Yahaya Bello has been a major blight on the credibility of EFCC. His appearance yesterday looks like a kind of redemption. And, he has gone there now. Heavens have not fallen. Even within the time he was being looked for, 2 governors I can remember have been invited to EFCC and they've gone there. I remember Governor of Delta State. I remember Governor of Taraba, if I'm not mistaken.
And they went.
And nothing happened. Well, he has also presented himself. He's been arraigned. He's facing the judicial process, and if without necessarily prejudging the outcome of the proceedings, at some point he might be lucky to get bail. Then he continues his life, and unfortunately, the case might even continue forever, going by what we've been seeing in Nigeria's recent history. And these are the things we're talking about. We need some speed, some kind of mathematical process, precision, the way we see it happening in other places, so that justice can actually be truly served, and of course it can act as deterrence, in the way in which we envisage it.
And just listening to Prof there, Mr. Yusuf, and talking about bail, do you think he's a flight risk, as some have suggested, a flight risk who should be kept in custody and denied bail? Because some have said, well, given that it took so long to get him in and he was actually being protected and kept away from it, perhaps the EFCC, at least at the moment, he's in EFCC custody, and I think the new hearing date is the 10th of December for the bail issue. So that at least he's in their net at the moment.
Yeah, well, recognizing that it's in court, so we don't be sub judice. I don't want to preempt the court, but the point is this: the reality is, former Governor Yahaya Bello has created credibility issue for himself. Various judges have taken position, not just one judge, that he has demonstrated the potential of somebody that cannot just be, his words shouldn't be taken. I mean, like Prof mentioned, and every other person said it, they call you, they invite you, you go. You answer the call. I've been invited by EFCC many years ago on matters, and I've gone there, and the heavens didn't fall. So he has created integrity issue that he has to deal with. And at the end of the day, if the judge in his wisdom decides that based on antecedents, which was very, very unfortunate and avoidable, we didn't need that, and then, I mean, whatever he sees, he asks for it, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So at least the drama of where he is and whether he's been cited is over. And the new governor who took over for him, Usman Ododo, appears to have given up on his attempts to sort of protect him.
Now he can focus on working for the people of Kogi State.
Absolutely.
Rather than being a quasi-bodyguard.
Absolutely. So let's move on from there to the GDP figures that came out earlier this week. What do you make of that third quarter GDP growth, Prof? Because on the face of it, it looks good, higher than the same quarter last year, which was 2.54%, higher by a stretch, and also higher than the previous second quarter of this year, 3.19%. But when you drill down into the figures, the agricultural sector grew by just 1.14%, manufacturing by, I think, 0.92%, and these are crucial sectors, aren't they?
Yeah, Charles, I think my basic economics tells me that GDP is an aggregate of consumption that has transpired in a country, maybe over a period of 1 year, consumption plus investment plus government spending, in addition to net exports. These things can be very critical, and we also know that it represents the microeconomic aspect of the system. But the problem we have is that, yes, we are making progress on account of those statistics, but it is not consequential enough to influence, to impact the macroeconomics of the country. And that's what's causing the disparity, the disbelief on the part of the citizenry, and of course increasing criticism of the National Bureau of Statistics. But the care we need to take in this circumstance is to be mindful of perception. Perception can actually be completely different from what empirical data actually reveal, because in the production of data, certain parameters, certain methodologies were used, and of course it may be at variance with what perception is, so it may not necessarily discredit the figures, the statistics, until we have actually investigated or double-checked those methodologies before we can draw conclusions. But for now, I think it's a slow start. It looks marginal, but at least it means that we're going somewhere, even though it's not satisfactory yet.
Okay, let me ask you, Baba Yusuf, coming off the back of that clearly there is a distortion in the economy. Nobody doubts that, beyond the fact that some economists say that the GDP figures look suspicious, which is what Prof had hinted at, because it's obvious to anyone who cares to look that Nigeria's economy is in, as somebody put it, intensive care unit. I mean, virtually all economists, beyond those who are government affiliated, have a different view altogether about this GDP growth. And as I said, the figures show a clear distortion between agriculture, for instance, manufacturing and services. So it is, I mean, apparent that there is something still wrong with the Nigerian economy.
Very spot on, and I'll tell you why. You see, if you look at the numbers, service sector, 53.58. Service sector, consulting, that's consulting, banking, legal practices. But when you talk about agriculture, you talk about industry, 17.75, agriculture, 26.65. You can now see where the problem is. And that is the critical drivers that will turn around the economy are still racing behind. With all due respect to service sector, the bankers are going, declaring profit. We don't know where the money is coming from, consultancy and all that. So the real sectors that are supposed to actually impact on what? Key is standard of living.
And jobs.
That is the standard, because the job will push up the standard of living. So I think what is happening is, a tussle between perception management, maybe by government, with all due respect to the government. And if I was in government, I would rather find a way for us to do management of expectations.
Yeah.
And you can still use the numbers to tell yourself the home truth as providers of service for the people. What are we supposed to do to up the standard of living? And that is where you manage expectation, because managing expectation reflects doing what the mandate tells you to do as leadership. But perception management to me is trying to see as much as possible how you can tone down people's situation. But the bottom line is these GDP numbers are for the economists and strategists like us. The people buying, including us buying gari in the market, palm oil, the prices remain escalating.
Right.
The standard of living is declining. Insecurity is still on the high. And those are the issues for the citizens of the country.
And that's the point that Prof made.
Yes.
And let me come to you, Prof, because of course, just because GDP is rising, if indeed it is, it doesn't mean that the standard of living for Nigerians is improving, does it?
Oh, yeah, and that's the point we made.
Yeah.
That, of course, GDP, if I'm not wrong, relates to microeconomics.
Yeah.
But the macroeconomic indices are still awry, and those are the things that we need to fix, until there's a marriage, a reconciliation between the two before we say we're making consequential progress.
Right.
But for now, we probably can just be slightly gratified that we're on the right path, but we're still far from the mark we want to get to.
I agree. And just as a final word, because we've got to run in a minute, the other point to note is that Nigeria's population is growing.
Yes.
And if a country's population is growing, it pushes GDP up.
Yes.
Because with more people, more money will be spent.
Yes.
But people in the country might not be getting any richer.
Absolutely.
So on average, they could be poor, but, while GDP is still going up.
Absolutely, and that's why last quarter of last year, we heard that over 133 million of us are multidimensionally poor. And let me land with this, Charles. While we are at it, the CBN and the fiscal side, that is the monetary and the fiscal side, I've said it and I can continue saying this, there must be a synergy between fiscal discipline and fiscal policy, Charles. Unless you have that harmony, even the monetary policies that we are trying to experiment on will not help us. And what is fiscal discipline? Fiscal discipline,
very briefly,
is budget. This budget padding has to stop. We must have effective budget performance. We should have fight against corruption. We should have scaling down cost of governance. Unless we do that, it is like pouring water in a basket and expecting it to retain, the water.
And on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank you for your wise counsel, as always. Baba Yusuf, a policy strategist, Group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company, and Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, Current Affairs Analyst, Dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Baze University, Abuja, the man we call Prof and Dean. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very
Too
much.
many
Good to see
titles,
you.
right? Just.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.